Coming up on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, day one. It's officially in the books here from Radio Row at the Scouting Combine here in Indianapolis. It was a very productive first day, and I've got plenty of great sound for you from head coach Josh McDaniels and also GM Dave Ziegler. They spent some quality time with us on Tuesday. You'll hear those conversations, plus more on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast, Wednesday, March 1st, 2023.
Just win. Just win. Just win. Just win.
The autumn wind is a raider, pillaging just for fun. He'll knock you round and upside down and laugh when he's conquered and won. And won. And won. And won. And won.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen each and every day. Remember, you can find the Locked On Raider podcast free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. My man Ari is man on the job, right? He is the guy, Johnny on the spot, we should call him. He makes sure that we're up on YouTube, looking good, sounding good, even when I'm on the road, as I am right now in Indianapolis. He's making sure that we're covered, and he's dealing with the different time changes and me getting everything done a little bit later than usual, but he is all over it, and we definitely appreciate him. You can check him out on Twitter at Ari Produces. And we got plenty of sound. We had a really productive first day on Tuesday, man. It was exciting. Got to the convention center very early, had to pick up our credentials and really let everything get rolling, right? And it's similar to being on Super Bowl Radio Row, except for really, in my opinion, when you're at the Scouting Combine, this is when team building begins. And so it feels like it has more purpose. Even though Super Bowl Radio Row is a lot of fun, it's great to cover the Super Bowl and get to talk to legends and Hall of Famers and bangers, as I call them, and, you know, former players and all this other good stuff and analysts and everything that we did Radio Row, for leading up to Super Bowl 57. But this is just different, right? Because everybody here has a purpose. And, of course, the Raiders have a lot of purpose as they need to try to put together a better product than what they saw and what they put out there on the field in 2022. And of course, the building process starts here at the Scouting Combine. They're going to see a lot of players, over 300 players are here at the Combine preparing for the draft. And there's going to be interviews, there's going to be drills, and in some instances, the interviews are more important than drills, depending on who it is. Maybe the player is injured or whatever the case may be, but it really all gets started here in Indy. So to be able to have the opportunity to bring you some coverage live from Indy is fantastic, and hopefully you enjoy it as much as I do. Before we get into some Josh McDaniels sound, it's funny, he talked at the podium early in the morning on Tuesday, and really it was probably about 20, 25 minutes that he had, he answered questions from the podium. But after that, the Raiders, they took a bunch of us, a handful of us, maybe about 10 of us out in the hallway and got an opportunity to talk to Josh McDaniels as well. So you'll hear that conversation, not the one that was on Raiders.com, not the one that you saw on NFL Network, but the conversation that we had with him in a little intimate setting in the hallway following that. So you'll hear that conversation coming up in a few minutes. And then in segment number 2 and 3, you'll hear from GM Dave Ziegler, who, on top of intimate conversations, we had about 25 minutes with him, and it was really some good stuff. And it literally was a handful of us, maybe 5 or 6 people max, over at the team hotel that they're staying at. So that was really good stuff. And whenever GM Dave Ziegler talks, you really need to listen. I think he gives you and provides a lot of great nuggets, like I like to call them, when he talks. So we'll get to that in segment number 2 and 3. But as I mentioned, before we get to head coach Josh McDaniels, I did want to pass along this note that Tashawn Reed and Vic Tafur from The Athletic put out on Twitter on Tuesday. Raiders Senior Vice President, Chief of Staff Marcel Reese has resigned. According to sources, Reese played for the franchise from 2008 to 16 and served as executive Senior Vice President in 2020. He's no longer listed on the team website as an employee. So that was pretty sudden. And the only thing I said to that was, well, I haven't seen Marcel around the facility very much. But then again, I haven't been around the facility a whole lot either now that it's the off season, but still haven't seen him as much as I was used to seeing him. So don't know how that came about, why that came about. Marcel Reese was asked to speak on it. He didn't respond to any request, and Raiders owner Mark Davis did not either. So don't really know what happened there, but everyone knows that Marcel Reese was Mark Davis's right-hand man. So it was interesting to see that he resigned, but he did, and that became official. At least the news came out on Tuesday. So that was some, like I said, a little interesting little nugget right there. Now let's go ahead and jump into Josh McDaniels, the head coach of the Raiders. He was one of the first ones on the podium on Tuesday. You're not going to hear the sound from the podium, but you will hear the 8 to 10 guys that had an opportunity to talk to Josh McDaniels and ask him a few questions following his podium session. Here is the Raiders head coach.
Josh, going back to Mac's rookie year, where you guys made the playoffs with a rookie quarterback. Did that change anything for you? Like you can compete with the first-year quarterback in the right situation?
I don't know if it changed anything for me. I think we've seen that, in our league, depending on who it is. I think each situation is different. Young players that come from college, some of them are more ready to handle what the National Football League is a little quicker than others. Some aren't. And so I've had a lot of experience going through that process. Jacoby Brissett had to play as a rookie for us. Jimmy Garoppolo did not. Matt Castle didn't have to play as a rookie. Played in his fourth year. And Mac played as a rookie. So there's different situations where a rookie could be more able to do that. But it depends on the person. It really does.
Obviously, it does depend on that. But when you look at your offense with Devontae and Hunter and Darren Waller, if you bring back Josh Jacobs, is that a conducive situation for a young quarterback to come into?
Yeah, when you got really good players around you, I think any quarterback would say, look, I play better when I have guys like that around me. And so I think that's that would be the goal, is to try to put a good supporting cast around whoever it is. And I just, I said it in there a number of times, but the quarterback room for us is going to change dramatically here in the next 2 months. We only have Chase under contract at the moment. So I would imagine veterans, rookies, maybe a couple of either, is going to be in the cards here as we go through it. But I think some of that is going to be opportunity. Some of it's going to be, can we acquire them? But we're going to go through this process. I'm super excited for tonight because we get the opportunity to interview some of them. This will be my first impression of some of these guys, and albeit short, it'll be meaningful.
What's a Josh McDaniels meeting with a quarterback like? Is it pretty grueling, or you put him up on the whiteboard?
It's like a media session. No, it's great. It'll be good. There's nothing. Look, it's 18 minutes. Right. I don't know how grueling it can be. So we really get a opportunity, get a feel for the kid. Kind of hear from him. He'll get an opportunity to make an impression on us with his personality, the way he, the vibe in the room is, you'll feel it. And then we have, video, whiteboard, so a little football talk, that kind of stuff. So it's not enough to make an evaluation. It's an impression. And that's really what you got to be careful about doing, is going too overboard on 18 minutes.
Josh, last year you guys traded your first round pick, but now as you and Dave entered year 2, is this an important draft for you guys?
I think every draft's important. We're certainly not, going to go through the year and act as if this is it, whatever it is. I don't care what decision we're making. We're trying to build in every stage of the year. We have a lot of opportunities to do that and want to try to improve our football team in any way that we can. So this year's a little different because of where we're picking in each round and how many picks we have, so it'll be an opportunity to add a good chunk of young players that hopefully, what we need is a group of young players to become the core of this team going forward. We have a few, we need more.
Josh, I realize fans will say it's an excuse, but the reality is the Raiders have just failed prior to your arrival on so many draft picks that aren't even on the roster. How part of building depth is key to winning?
Yeah, it's really important. Our league is in many ways a league of attrition, and so I don't remember the exact number this year, but we had to play 70-some players, I think, over the course of the season. I think that's common for every team nowadays. You 17 games and, long training camp, and you go through the grind, So depth and young depth is important. Because you're a lot of times you get these guys that are coming out of college and their bodies are a little healthier because they haven't taken the same pounding as some other guys have. So Trying to find the right fits for us in every pick that we have in the draft, including college free agency after the draft, is going to be important. Thought we found some good players after the draft last year. Our scouting department did a great job of Luke Masterson and Sam Webb and Darian Butler, and we had a lot of guys that contributed. So that'll be important to us again this year.
Two-part question about the defensive line. Obviously, you guys recently parted ways with Frank Okam.
Yep.
What went into that decision? And then secondly, is defensive tackle specifically a position that you look to address in free agency in the draft?
Yeah. Frank's a good coach, and, didn't have a lot of movement on our staff. We just, felt like it was something that we looked at. And, Pat's got a fairly broad expertise in that area, and I think, may use a little bit more of that going forward. Look, I think our defense is in some respects, at some positions, is kind of it's tailor-made for us to add some young players or some new players. We don't have a ton of players on the roster on defense right now. So it's going to be one of many that we're going to target. But at the end of the day, we want every player we add to kind of improve the position that he's being, added at, and I think defensive line, corner, safety, inside linebacker, there's a lot of things we can do to try to make our defense better and hopefully more explosive.
In your eyes and in Dave's eyes, what does a Raider look like to you guys?
We're trying to build we want to build a tough team, a smart team, a team that can handle adversity and play well under pressure. And I've used the word explosive a number of times today. Our league is becoming that. And so if you want to win games in our league, you got to, be tough enough to, battle up front in the trenches, protect the quarterback, run the football, stop the run, get after the quarterback. Got to have a smart team so we don't, hurt ourselves with, self-inflicted errors, penalties, turnovers. Those are things that cost you games in many regards. So we're trying to look for those traits in every guy that we add, and the more explosive we can get, the better we're going to be.
Josh, you come in time for two more. We got to get
Josh, if you guys do draft a quarterback this year, do you feel good that Mark Davis is going to be patient and allow you to develop the quarterback the way it's needed?
Yeah, look, like I said, I'm going to go into it with the right mentality. I came here with the opportunity, with Dave to try to build this thing in our vision, and I didn't look at it as a 1 to 2 year project, and we're going to try to continue to do the right things every step of the way.
What do you see in terms of the secondary you guys have right now? What do you see in terms of the roster? You guys coming back in the secondary, what do you have to improve in that area?
Yeah, I think we have some young players that are coming back. Don't have a ton of experience at this point. Trayvon's played a ton of snaps for us at safety, obviously. Nate's played a lot of football, for us at corner. So, that's definitely going to be an area where there's going to be some new people in those two rooms. And, again, trying to get more explosive, touch the football a little bit more, be a little bit more active in the passing game in that regard. I think that would help us.
What's the next step for Trayvon? What's the next step in his development you have to see from him?
Merrick?
Well, yeah.
He's a pleasure to work with. I think he learned a lot last year being his second year. His first year, you're playing out there. I'm not sure any rookie really totally knows everything that's going on out there. You're just trying to do your job right. I think it slowed down for him a little bit last year. We had him into some different roles. I think Deron Harmon really was a big impact on Trey in terms of how to do your job every day and go about your process. So you'd love for Trey to take another step forward. We're going to use him in a lot of different roles again here. He's a really good football player, and like to see him take a leadership role in the secondary.
So there you go. That's the Raiders head coach right there, Josh McDaniels. After his podium session, took us out into the hallway and had about 8 to 9 minutes with him, just talking all things silver and black. And that was, like I said, a little bit more intimate. Those guys that he knew. At the podium, there was all kind of different media, from national media to New England media to, of course, Las Vegas Raiders media. A whole lot of different people there asking questions, peppering head coach Josh McDaniels. So that went about 20, 25 minutes. But that 8 to 9 minutes of conversation with him, I thought was really good. Also on the news and notes little segment and portion of segment number 1, I did want to pass along this note about the Raiders adding Darius Swinton as a special teams assistant coach. He was formerly with the Chargers as their special teams coach. So nothing of big significance, but I thought about it when Josh McDaniels talked about Frank Okam and the fact that he's no longer with the silver and black, and it sounds like that's It's a role that Patrick Graham is really going to kind of take on his own, right? He already has experience with that. That's something that you heard Josh McDaniels say. Pat's familiar with that, so he's going to take on a bigger role of the job that Frank Okam took. So then I realized that, oh, yeah, I forgot to pass along the news about Darius Swinton, just a special teams assistant coach with the Silver and Black now. And, again, it's a minor nugget, but it's a nugget, so I thought I'd bring that to the table. Speaking of nuggets, you'll get a bunch of nuggets coming up in segment number 2 as GM Dave Ziegler met with us again at the team hotel that the Raiders are staying at, and it was literally a handful of us. We were sitting at a table, and we were able just to kind of put our phones down there, press record, and pepper them with some questions about free agency, about the draft, just about team building in general. And you'll hear that coming up in segment number 2 and segment number 3. Before I get to that, though, I do want to tell you about FanDuel, and it is beyond the midway point of the NBA season. We know the All-Star break is over. A lot of folks were excited and fired up about the Lakers, and then LeBron got hurt. So there's that. But you know what there is good time for now? To download the FanDuel app, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers, you get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet does not win. All you got to do, again, is download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe and secure, and it's super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything. The money line, points scored in a game, how many threes are hit, whatever the case may be, they've got you covered. FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss a chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Got a lot to get to in a little bit amount of time, so I'm just going to jump right into it. I really described it pretty well in the end of segment number 1 about the setting that we were in to have our conversation with GM Dave Ziegler. I thought it was some really good stuff. He's one of those guys that anytime he talks, he really gets my attention, and I definitely want to make sure to listen in, and I know it's some good stuff that you'll want to hear. So here you go. Here's part 1 of the conversation with Raiders GM Dave Ziegler from Tuesday.
Do you feel pretty comfortable that the quarterback of the future could be here in Indianapolis for the Raiders?
I think it's a possibility. There's a lot more work to be done, to be honest with you, to really say, yeah, I'm confident. Where we're at now in the process is we've watched a lot of film on the players, and that's important to get an idea of what the value of the player is. It's a really important part of the process. That position in particular, there's such an emphasis that we put on the neck up and what that is and what that looks like and what it means and how it translates. And you can't get that part off the film. You can get an idea, a little bit of, you can see decision making and processing, and there's an element of it. It's not that it's zero, but until you get in the room with the guy, get him on the board, eventually I would say work through installs and see how they can retain information. I mean, this is the first step of that puzzle, to do that, whether then there's the pro day, then there's 30 visits, and you can do private visits and things of that nature. And so I think there's some really talented young players here. And I think there's some years where there's maybe 1 or 2. I think there's, it looks like there's, a handful of guys that have shown on film to be talented, to be diverse in their skill set. And so that's exciting, and then we got to go through the next part of the process to really, I'd say, determine that.
How does what they're doing in college football kind of challenge the NFL in terms of evaluation, especially with what they're doing offensively compared to what you guys are doing offensively?
Yeah, it makes it there's definitely a challenge there. We've seen a lot of people overcome it, at this point. So I'd say there's probably less, maybe less reservations, but there's the element of just, from the basic, taking a snap under center. And there's a difference when you're taking the snap under center and you're backpedaling, if you will, and processing and making a decision versus just standing there in the shotgun and seeing the ball. There's a difference there. But we've seen a lot of people overcome that, and we've also seen offenses have adapted to that too. You don't get a lot of guys under center in certain situations that aren't comfortable with it. The defenses are different. There's definitely a more complex, I'd say, defensive schematic game at the NFL level. And so, again, that goes just into someone's ability to learn, someone's work ethic, and do they have the tools, and I'd say both from a personal and a mental skill set to put the work in to learn it. I think what we've seen now is you can, a guy like Lamar Jackson. Now, Lamar Jackson was super talented. He was a Heisman Trophy winner, obviously, but he's come in the league, and Lamar Jackson can play quarterback in the league, and there's plenty of other guys, along those lines. And so, I think there's it's difficult because you have to put the work in to determine all that, and you're not going to still have like it's solid. But I think a lot of guys have shown like they can overcome that now.
Specifically with the first round, obviously you guys didn't have one last year. What sort of goes into the process when you're determining, hey, do we want to try to move up? Do we stay here? Do we trade back? I know it's fluid depending on what happens on draft night, but what's sort of the just general thought process when it comes to that approach?
Yeah, I think, well, in both approaches, on a very basic level, you have to have, to trade up for, specifically, you have to have, obviously, like there's someone that you want to go do that for. And then, you have to weigh the cost of doing business to do that, And so I think what you really have to weigh in those situations is how you value the player and the cost that it's going to take to get that player. Because once you move up, you're obviously typically you're subtracting other draft picks, which are other players. And so you got to that's the thing that you have to weigh between those two things. In terms of moving back, and we moved back a couple times, I believe, last year. We moved up a couple times also. But in terms of moving back, it's usually when you're in a draft spot, can be anywhere from maybe 2 to 4 players that you feel really comfortable taking at that spot. And so I think the moving back portion is you get to that point, someone's calling up, and you're looking like, hey, we're going to get one of these 4 players or one of these 3 players if we move back 3 slots per se. Do you know what I mean? And so you're kind of just you're evaluating the risk reward and the gamble of those players, that pool of players being there if you move back. And there's a lot of, I'd say, intelligence that goes into figuring trying to answer those questions based on what you feel the needs of other teams are, things that you've learned about maybe, what the direction other teams are going to go. And so you try to have some insight beyond just, your gut in those situations. But I think that's the kind of the dichotomy there of those two decisions that you have to weigh.
How do you balance the patience and diligence needed to find a future quarterback with the desire to win now?
Yeah. I think that you have to, when you're looking at, the desire to win now and a future quarterback, it's interesting because we've seen it go both ways in terms of you draft a young guy and they sit, right? Like Mahomes sat for a year, and you can go back to, it was probably a little bit more prevalent. I think even Carson Palmer might have sat for 2 years. And so there's that, there's a history there of doing that and players having success. And there's also the history of guys getting thrown in the fire right away and it not working out so well. Now there's some guys that have gotten thrown in the fire and, taken their lumps and grown. Andrew Luck, I think he led the league in interceptions his rookie year and also went through. And so, yeah, in terms of, to your question, balancing that decision, right, off winning now, I think it's just a philosophical thing that you have to make a decision on, and you have to be aligned from the top of the organization down. If you draft a young guy and you're going to commit to that person sitting all year and learning, everybody, I think you just have to have that communication on the front end because there might be some things to stomach. Do you know what I mean? Or, again, that pressure to get that guy out there and throw him in the fire. So it does take, I would say, a unique amount of discipline to do that. But I think more importantly, it has to be alignment, like from the get-go on a situation like that.
Do you guys have that already? You guys have discussed that possibility or not yet?
Yeah, no, I think, Josh and I have discussed like kind of what, our, philosophically what, we would like our approach to be on that. There's still more work to be done for me to say, yeah, this is what we're going to do 100%. I'd say we're not there. Of course, we've had those discussions. We've had those discussions over the years. But there is a moment in time here as we're approaching this next phase of the offseason where you have to just make the commitment to what you're going to do if you end up doing that.
Yeah. When you say throwing somebody in the fire, sometimes when you get a high draft pick at quarterback, you're kind of, because the team was bad, that's why they're drafted so high. Mm-hmm. And maybe the offensive support's not going to be there. But in your case, when you look at, if Josh Jacobs comes back, Darren Waller, Hunter Renfrow, Devontae Adams, that's a pretty good setup for any quarterback. Do you feel like that's conducive to a young quarterback maybe stepping in and having some success as a result, where you're not just throwing him into the fire, there's a lot of support there for him?
Yeah, I would say if you were just looking at the support part of that, you would say, yeah, there's a lot of support there for someone to succeed. I think it really ends up being an individual case-by-case thing, because it really depends on the person and what they're ready for. Because if they're not ready to take advantage of all those weapons, because they're not ready for the responsibilities of being an NFL quarterback, then the weapons are null and void. And so in theory, yes, there's a lot of weapons there. But I think, it comes back to the individual and what they're ready for.
Dave, Devontae's been pretty, very supportive of you and Josh, but said he wants to be kept in the loop. It's important to him. Obviously, you're not going to let him pick the next quarterback, but how much conversation do you have? Hey, this is a guy we believe when that time comes, that your plan is. How much do you include him in it?
Yeah, every relationship's kind of unique. I would say for myself, and I won't speak for Josh, but for myself, Devontae's probably one of me and him probably have one of the closest relationships that I've had with a player as an active player that's still playing in the NFL. And so, our communication's pretty fluid. Whether it's on the quarterback or whether it's just in general conversation. And so Devontae, we've talked about it before, he's earned the right to be kept in that loop. Josh and I feel that way by what he's accomplished and who he is as a player and who he is as a leader on that team. And so he'll be involved in those conversations, like you said, and Devontae knows he's not selecting who the quarterback is. But he'll be involved in the process, and we'll bounce some ideas off him, and ultimately, again, it's going to be the decision that we're going to make, and he understands and respects that at the same time.
You mentioned the price of doing business. Last year when you made the move for Devontae, you just gave up a first and a second last year, and it was done. What's the philosophy going into thinking about draft picks that come from other years? If you have to include that in a move, is it worth the player, or is it just player-to-player basis?
Yeah, I think it's player-to-player basis. There's always when you're working through the draft, I always find it's the future pick doesn't always seem sexy at the time until you get to the next year, and then you're glad that you have that future pick. That's kind of that's the feeling oftentimes that you go through when you're in that moment. I think at the end of the day, it is based on the player, and again, it's like what you determine the value of the player as. Mm-hmm. And so, just like with the Devontae trade, we determined that the value, we were okay with his value of being a first and second round pick, and so we made the decision and went with it, and we never looked back, and we're happy with the decision that we made. And so I think that's what you have to evaluate. What's the value of that player to your organization, and then how does that equate to the value of the picks? And I think you have to look at your individual situation too, in terms of where you're at as a team and what you're trying to build and the holes that you're trying to fill. But at the same time, if you feel like the value's there, you're going to do what you need to do to go get it.
With free agency looming and so many teams needing a starting quarterback, the timeline for you guys to make the decision on the route that you're going to go to get your quarterback gets sped up. So are you prepared, I guess, evaluation-wise, that you'll have to make that determination here by mid-March?
Yeah, from an evaluation standpoint, when you're talking specifically about pro free agency, yeah, we are. There's a lot of pro free agency is a little bit different than the draft. The draft, the player's there. You have the draft pick. You select them. You're not negotiating a contract or going through those mechanics to get a deal done. And so, but from a straight evaluation standpoint, yeah, we've put in a lot of work through that process. We've evaluated the quarterbacks that are in pro free agency. We understand what that market is. We have a hierarchy of what that looks like, in our building. And yeah, we're prepared to execute that plan, with the caveat being there's a contract element and a cost element involved in that. And so we don't know what those prices are. Do you know what I mean? That's not, you don't really know that until the free agency period begins. And so you have to have a level of fluidity to it because you don't know necessarily what that price tag is going to be for an individual player, or that player can sign with another team. And so I'd say if you go in there with just plan A, you could be scrambling if you don't have a multi-step plan in that situation.
So there you go. I thought some really good stuff. He dips into the draft, obviously, talks about, different philosophies, talking about trades and, talking about traits of quarterbacks. And, of course, quarterback has been the theme, right? I mean, every question that could be asked of us, even just walking around here is, okay, so who's the quarterback going to be? Who's the quarterback going to be? And even amongst us, the media that cover the Raiders on the regular, it's like, all right, so what's your gut feeling on the quarterback? What's your gut feeling? The one thing I could take away from the combine so far is that every option is on the table, right? I mean, I don't think they've ruled out anything. I don't think they've come to any conclusion on exactly what they're going to do or the direction that they're going to go. That's really, to me, that's the feeling that I get just, again, from talking to these guys, listening to what they have to say and really listening closely, not just barely listening or whatever, being on my phone while they're talking. No, I'm really like dialed in and focused in on what they're saying. And to me, it's like all options are still on the table. But that wasn't the end of the conversation that we had with GM Dave Ziegler. Still got part 2 of our conversation. You'll hear that next in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Here we go, Raider Nation, segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. I was hoping to get to some calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line. Thought I was going to be able to get to some on this show today, but when you have Josh McDaniels talk in an intimate setting and then you have Dave Ziegler give you 25 to 30 minutes, you've got to bring that to the podcast, right? I tweeted out that I just spent 30 good minutes with Dave Ziegler as soon as that conversation was over on Tuesday and had 250 retweets, 250 likes. Q, you going to put it on the podcast? Absolutely. I want to get to calls and texts, but, man, this is some good stuff. So I'm excited about what we're bringing to the table all week long here in Indianapolis at the Scouting Combine 2023. And, again, this is the first step in building a team. So here's part 2 of the conversation that we had with GM Dave Ziegler talking about, building that team. Here's Tashawn Reed.
At the Senior Bowl, you mentioned that obviously you guys need to improve at all 3 levels of the defense.
Yeah.
And because of your situation, you guys don't really have all that many players under contract on defense, so it's almost a blank slate, not completely. Is your preference to build, sort of the traditional front to back in terms of prioritizing the defensive line first, or are you more of a secondary, boost that up and build up?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that I've always been in a belief when you're talking about the defensive side of the football of I'd say building it inside out. I think having a strong defensive line sets the tone for the rest of the defense. Now, that doesn't mean, you can find a good player that you're going to have to draft a good player. We've talked about drafting the best available players, but I think having a deep defensive line that can disrupt, that you can run in waves and things of that nature. And, we have a lot of work to do to get to that point. But if I was going to kind of lean one way, I would say that would be, where I would start from a building standpoint.
Andre James, and I know he's under contract, but would you like to rework that deal in order to him to stay, or are you happy where he is? Money?
Yeah, I think that with Andre in particular, we spent the last year with him and got to know him and got to see him play. And there's a lot of good things about Andre as a person and as a leader that we really like. And I think he improved as a football player this year. I would say we're not to that point yet. Just with where we're at from a roster standpoint, we mentioned how many UFAs that we have this year, how many expiring contracts that we need to work on. And so I'm glad he's under contract. It can take a breath because he's there. But we have just kind of a major order of business with this current group to handle before kind of get to that step. But really excited about what he did this year at the same time.
Josh had mentioned that you and Josh Jacobs' representation have been in dialogue. Any characterization on where that might be, and any feeling of it could get done before the deadline for the free agent or the franchise tag?
Yeah, I'd say it's still very fluid. Those conversations have. We've had a few of them, getting everybody's ideas on the table. We'll continue to work through that process this week. You never know. I mean, I've been involved in deals that I thought were going to take 2 months, and they got done in 2 days. And I've had the experience of doing deals that I thought were going to get done quickly that don't. And so, there's a deadline coming up, and from in terms of applying the tag. March 7th, I believe, is the date. And so we understand what that deadline is. And we're going to continue to work that process this week. So I can't put like a specific thing, a specific time on it, or I'd say like a gut feeling on what it's going to be or not going to be. Just irresponsible. I've been, done this too many times to know that would kind of paint yourself in a corner that way. But I'd say the commonality is that we want Josh to be a Raider. and that Josh wants to be a Raider. And so that's a really good place to start. And, hopefully we'll work to get some common ground here sooner than later.
Is it a question of either tag or contract, or is that too simple to say it that way?
Well, both things are on the table. Yeah, I don't think that we've made up our mind and just said like on either way, on either side, but like, hey, we're not, if it's a tag, then forget it. You know what I mean? Or making the decision that we're not going to do the tag. I think that both of those opportunities are on the table. They should be on the table, and again, we'll see how it plays out. But I'd say it could go either way in terms of how it gets executed.
Because of the way most of your contracts are structured, next year's books are pretty clean, I think, right now. I mean, it's an estimate because we don't know the cap.
Sure.
It's like over $100 million. Is that something that is intentional to sort of keep that, kind of open in terms of planning for future moves, or is it just kind of happen that way?
Well, some of that happened before we, the results of things that happened before we got here. So I'm not going to take full responsibility for that. But I would say that, the intentionality is of, and this isn't going to happen every time, is doing deals that, not having a plethora of deals that end up putting you tight against the cap, like having cap flexibility, having a healthy cap growth, or having a healthy cap situation. I think we like the flexibility that gives us, to be able to not only, it's not always about re-signing or signing a player that's out there, but re-signing your own players in particular, which we've talked about wanting to, really kind of grow that continuity within our organization. And so I think philosophically we would always like to kind of operate with some healthy cap and not kind of, be tight against it. I've worked in those situations, and that's hard because you end up making decisions on your roster sometimes during the season, week to week, that are predicated by the cap. Even to the point of like, hey, we're not going to elevate this player this week because of the cap situation, or you're constantly restructuring guys during the year. So there's a bit of, I'd say, intentionality on our part, that we want to have that flexibility as we go through kind of each individual year.
Is it your intention to be aggressive in free agency? I mean, do you have a long list of guys you're like, yeah, I think we can add these people, or is it still too early to make that decision?
I think that you can develop your philosophy before free agency starts. Now, sometimes that plan doesn't work out just based on how the market materializes and things of that nature. We're always going to have a group of players, I would say, in free agency that you just know based on what the market is and what conversations are. If you want to get that player, you're going to have to do that in the first couple days of free agency. And then there's going to be another pool of players that you're going to make the decision on, like this position group or this player, whatever it may be. We're going to wait. We're going to sit and wait and see how the market materializes. And I think that is predicated on maybe the depth of that position. That may be predicated on what the draft is, the surplus and demand in the draft at that certain position is. So I think there's a few different variables that go into making that decision. But there's situations where there's probably, I think, unless you're planning on sitting free agency out, and you just go in with that mindset, there's always going to be a player or two that that if you're going to do a deal, you're going to have to do that in the front side of free agency. And there'll be some players like that this year also.
Is Jared Stidham still, is that in the picture kind of a guy and bringing back?
Yeah, it's in the picture. Like anything, those conversations are fluid, and he's not under contract at this point. And so, we're happy with what he did, and he's a player, obviously, that because of his experience in the system, there's value. There's value in that, and so we'll look at that market. And there's a lot of players in that market, this year that we're going to have to, that we've evaluated, that are going to be a part of that equation too. And so we'll see how it ends up working out. But ultimately, we'd like Jarrett to be a Raider going forward. Just have to see how it fits together.
The 2 games that he played, did that open up your eyes any, or kind of validate what you felt he was capable of doing?
Yeah, well, I think anytime we had never seen him play a live football game, and so anytime you get to see someone where the bullets are really flying, playing against top tier competition on the other side of the ball, there's value in seeing that. And so there was value in seeing that with Jarrett. And we've always thought Jarrett was a good football player, and that he had the potential to play well. Seeing it, yes, it provides more validation. There's less question marks. Now it's a 2-game sample. We also were 0-2. in those 2 games. And so while yes, there's some validation to it, I'd still say there's still a lot of questions to answer on that position because the sample size is so small.
Do you ever feel like there's pressure or maybe even an anxiousness to make sure that you're hitting the draft right, so you're not having to rely on free agency to try to build the team?
Yeah, it's a healthy pressure, and it's a healthy kind of anxiousness. I mean, it's part of like the juice of like the fun of being in personnel. But to your specific question, yeah, we want to improve our homegrown talent. That's something that hasn't materialized here over the years, and it shows you it's a difficult process. There's no guarantees to it, but I think we feel like we have an opportunity this year with the amount of picks that we do have, with where we're picking, that we have an opportunity this year to build that core group of players. That doesn't always mean that you have 12 superstars and 12 starters. Some of those guys are working class individuals that provide depth to your team too. But yes, there's a healthy excitement, a healthy anxiousness and anxiety to we have that opportunity in front of us and go capitalize on it.
Do you feel like there's a number of starters that you need to pull out of the draft, or is it kind of fluid each year?
I think it's fluid. I think it's fluid on where your team is, and I think it's hard to say to put that expectation on a player to say we're drafting these guys and we need these 4 guys to start. Do you want to hit starters in the draft? Yes. I don't really put I want them all to be starters. But I don't really go in there and put a specific number on it. We plan to come out of the draft with some guys that are starters for the Raiders for a long time. I would say that.
This time,
for a couple more guys.
Yeah, this time last year, probably in a little bit of scramble mode, just kind of coming aboard. Can you quantify where you are this year compared to last year? Being ahead of the game for the draft and for off season.
Yeah, we're a lot farther along. We just, we had that time, if you remember, like I was on the job a little bit over a year. They had already done their free agency process. They had went through, they graded all the free agents. They had graded them on the scale that they were using. And they graded them in the system that they were scouting for. And so we are in the opposite end of that spectrum this year. And so that provides a lot more clarity for us, a lot more clarity for the scouts as they went through the fall of knowing what we were looking for. There was a lot less learning, even though there's still a lot of learning going on. The scouts last year were learning the grading scale and how to interpret it, and they're trying to evaluate the player, and they're trying to evaluate the player for this new system in a very condensed amount of time. And so a lot farther along in those regards. And then the draft, I would say the same thing. It's the same dichotomy. They were evaluating under a different scale for a different system. And so we're a lot farther along. Does that guarantee better results? You would hope it does, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case. But we're confident that the continuity that we've had, the amount of learning that's taken place over the last year, the group of talented scouts that we have in the system, that it's going to pay a positive result for us.
Dave, I was talking to Josh about this. Fans don't want to hear it. They think it's an excuse. But prior to your arrival, their drafting has been an epic failure, especially in the first round. As a GM, how frustrating is that when you got a roster where there hasn't been guys that you've done the homegrown and you didn't have the depth? How hard was that to deal with?
Yeah, well, I think what the situation is. You evaluate the situation before you take one of these jobs, and so what the landscape is and what's missing and what needs to be built. And the reality is that going back to the homegrown piece of the homegrown talent, the situation is what it is, and so now we have to figure out the solutions for it. And the solution is drafting well. And so I wouldn't say frustration or any of those types of things. Like, again, we knew what we were getting into. We knew what the task at hand was, and we've developed a plan to hopefully make decisions that is going to improve the homegrown talent and boost that young core of players that we need, and that's what we're prepared to do.
Is there a position that you think is really deep in this draft? Are you looking forward to talking to some of these guys?
Yeah, and I probably, I have some more digging to do, I would say. Just a couple of the positions on the surface that look like there's some depth to it. On the defensive side of the ball, the cornerback position looks like there's some healthy depth there throughout the position. The tight end position's unique this year. I think this is probably one of the deeper tight end classes that I've seen maybe since I've been in the league. again on the surface. But there's quite a few players there. So I'd say those are the two positions that, on the surface looks like there's a good amount of depth at.
You guys all set? Is there any scenario where you got, regardless of round, where you leave this draft without drafting a quarterback?
Gosh, well, I'd never like to talk in absolutes. I think there always could that happen? Yes, it could happen. Do I see that happening? No, I don't see that happening. I think every year, we've talked about it philosophically, and I think, Ron Wolf had a philosophy in Green Bay that almost every draft they wanted to come out in some form or fashion with a quarterback prospect. And I'm not going to tie myself to that because I don't think it, again, you do an absolute and then it doesn't go that doesn't happen, and then that doesn't work out well for you. But I would say some form or fashion we're always looking at the quarterbacks, and whether it's we had Chase Garbers last year in free agency after the college free agency after the draft. But I think we want to always continue to add to that position, and I think we'll be this year will be no different.
So there you go. That was part 2 of the conversation that we had. And again, Tashawn Reed, Vic Tafer, Hondo Carpenter, Vinny Bonsignor, myself. There was a couple others that were in attendance, but that was it. That was really it that had an opportunity to talk to GM Dave Ziegler. And he's not talking at a podium. He just talked to us. So I thought that was really cool of the Raiders. And I thought that was great of GM Dave Ziegler to take the time to talk to the local media. And it was basically by invite only. Not everyone wasn't allowed to be in that room. And so I thought that that was great. And I felt pretty honored to be in that room as well, sitting around the round table with the GM of the Silver and Black. So that's all I got for you for today's show. Again, just stuff collected at the Combine, and who knows what today's going to bring, but I can tell you right now that there's going to be a lot of defensive linemen that are going to speak either at the podium or at separate tables, and I'm going to try to talk to as many of those guys as possible because the Raiders need as much defense as possible. There's some real big-time players that are going to be talking today, like Tyree Wilson from Texas Tech. You'll get Will Anderson from Alabama, and a whole lot more. It's going to be a busy, busy day. The Raiders are rolling out, rolling in. They've been busy. I've been busy. That's just what we do here at the Combine. So we're going to keep it busy and keep it moving each and every day. So again, hopefully you're enjoying this, and thank you so much for making the show your first listen each and every day. Remember, you can find the Locked On Raider podcast free and available on all platforms. Ari, thank you so much for your patience and the job that you're doing. You're doing fantastic, making sure we're up on YouTube. I definitely appreciate that. And give Ari a follow on Twitter at Ari Produces. Again, on Twitter at Ari Produces. Does a fantastic job for us each and every day. So until tomorrow, Raider Nation, I'll bring you some more goods and some more nuggets and some more sound from the Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. Till then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.